they said, you could we've got lots to do. You could do this full time and you could join us and be a co-founder.
Oh, wow.
And I said, sounds interesting. And they said, yeah, we have this thing called stock. And, okay. So I dropped out of college. I quit my job.
Okay.
And I started working for the company without pay.
I'm Ryan Carson, the founder of Treehouse, and this is Educate Yourself, the show where we interview ordinary people that have done extraordinary things, all without a college degree. I dig into the nitty-gritty details of how they overcame challenges, stayed motivated, and ultimately achieved their goal. These are real stories from real people. Today, I'm joined by Holly Files, a woman in technology. She overcame significant barriers and accomplished great things, all without a college degree. Today, we're going to dig into her story and how she did it. Holly, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming in and enjoying with all our fancy lights and setup.
Yeah, they are fancy lights.
So you've been a chief operating officer twice, a founder, a board chairperson, a senior vice president at least twice, and more, all without a college degree. And as a woman and all the challenges that come with that in the workplace. So before we dig into all those kind of things, I want us to go back and hear your story from the beginning. So tell us about your childhood and the journey to your first job.
Oh, my gosh. Well, my childhood, we moved an incredible amount when I was a kid.
Okay.
About every 6 months, 8 months. No, I am not a military brat.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it just was, that's how my dad rolled.
Interesting.
So,
what was his job?
he did a variety of things. He was a police officer. He had a refrigeration and electrical company.
Wow.
Did a lot of installation work, kind of trades work.
Okay.
And he was always chasing the grass is greener.
Okay.
So
did you have siblings or just
I
you?
have a little brother.
Okay.
So 2.5 years younger than me.
Got it. Wow.
Yeah.
So moving a ton every 6 months.
Yeah.
And that was that all the way, kindergarten to senior year?
Yeah. From actually before kindergarten, I think it kind of started when I was about 3 years old.
Okay.
And yeah, I went all the way up until I think my sophomore year of high school. We finally settled in and I stayed in the same high school.
That's crazy.
So
did that make you somehow more independent or did it actually cause you to have less confidence?
Oh, I think it made me more independent. Definitely pushed me to figure out how to connect with people.
Right.
You're 8 years old and you go into a school mid-year.
Right.
Everybody has their best buddies already. So you have to do something.
Right.
And, I chose the path of trying to engage people. My brother chose the path of trying to get into trouble very successfully.
Got it. He's good at that.
So I think that did make me more independent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I've gotten onto Jack Reacher books now. And I was just thinking about what he said. And he's obviously a fictional character, but he supposedly moved around and he said he always had to establish his place in the pecking order every time you went. Because otherwise you would, sort of pay the price. And obviously that's a fake book. But is there any truth to that? You had to learn how to kind of show confidence as you moved around or not really?
Yeah, I think you do. Otherwise, you tend to recede and become probably really shy.
Right.
I don't think anybody would say I was necessarily shy as a child.
Yeah. You do seem outgoing and friendly, so that's good.
Thanks. It
So,
worked.
As you moved around and had to kind of deal with that, how did you react positively? Because part of the thing is I want people to watch this show and understand, well, people doing these interesting, impressive things, you moved around a lot and were able to survive that and you seem strong inside, but why are you like that? What do you think allowed you to move around and be confident?
Well, I think there were probably a couple of things that contributed to it. I mean, first off, when you started doing something that young, you don't actually know that isn't normal.
Right.
right?
You're like, all right, we're going to
You're a
just move all the
child
time.
and you just move all the time, right? And you acquire skills that you didn't even know were skills until you put them into
Interesting.
practice later.
Right.
So I think for me, the impact of that is it made me really change friendly,
Right.
change easy.
Right.
I mean,
You can adapt.
I can adapt and I love change.
Wow. Okay. So sophomore year, finally settled down.
Yeah.
Went through high school and then keep going. Tell me the story
so
from there.
from there, I think, the very first job that I had, besides what all kids do or all girls do, babysitting, was working in a retail store.
Oh, interesting, right?
I loved sewing, and there was a store that sold fabric. And
And what city was this?
Mountain View, California.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting.
Before Google was even a glimmer in anybody's eye.
And was it all fruit orchards and things like that back
No, that
then?
actually was kind of Sunnyvale and
Got
around
it.
the Mountain View area. No, Mountain View actually was lower middle class and low
Right.
class socioeconomically.
Got it.
I was a minority.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
my high school was predominantly Hispanic.
Right.
And I think white and Asian, all others,
Right.
made up less than 10%.
Wow, interesting. So you end up in Mountain View, center of technology, but
Not then.
not then. And tell us what happened after that.
So, I got this job in the fabric store. And what I found really quickly was I loved business.
Oh, interesting.
Commerce.
Right.
I loved figuring out what brought customers in, what made them spend more. I loved counting the money at the end of the day.
Right.
I mean, just all these
It
things.
just all ticked.
It did. And
Interesting.
so that kind of was the start of what led to a series of roles that while I was going to school. And so I started in junior college. And as I went into junior college and I'm doing these retail jobs and then office jobs and finally landed in Atari, I found that I really loved figuring out problems, complex business problems.
All right.
And that led me to decide that I wanted to be an attorney.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to hear all about that. But did you have any kind of interesting stories where you learned a brutal lesson when you were first working retail?
Mm-hmm.
Just fun kid stuff, like got to show up or you get fired type stuff?
So my second or third job after that one was actually being the office manager and bookkeeper for a wholesale meat company.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which, little did I know was not necessarily fully on the up and up.
Aha. Okay.
And so my brutal lesson to be learned there was do your research
Right.
beforehand. Because you might actually find yourself, filmed on the 5:00 news.
Right. Not good.
So no, not something I, necessarily
do again.
strike out, put on my resume. But it just was kind of how to make sense whether a business had ethics that matched with my own ethics.
Got it. So graduated high school
Mhm.
and started junior college.
Mhm.
And then you were working and learning, gosh, I like business, commerce,
Yep.
and then thought maybe I want to be an attorney. So tell me what happens next. That's amazing.
Yeah. I think I was in love with the title,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
but I liked untangling, the contract law, business contract law in particular. But I was going to school, working, and met a couple of guys who were working for a startup or a software company in Palo Alto.
Okay.
And they had this great idea, and they were going to start a software company.
How old were you then?
I think I was 22.
Right.
Yeah,
Wow.
21, 22.
And so you were working on the side as you were going to junior college?
Yeah, well, I was working full-time,
Oh,
pulled a full-time class load.
Wow.
And
Okay.
then these guys, and I was going JC then and San Jose State, kind of both of them simultaneously. And these guys came to me and they said, we're starting this software company. And it's like, what software? And
That's
they
awesome.
said, well, we're going to write code and it does things. And it's like, wow. And at this point, I was working for Atari Games
Wow.
in customer
How
service.
interesting.
And so they were explaining that they write software that helps companies manufacture things. It was manufacturing,
Oh,
ERP
interesting.
software.
Right.
And they said, we need help getting incorporated, and we don't want to pay for an attorney.
Can you figure it out?
Yeah, that was exactly what they
Wow,
said.
really? Okay.
And I said, I think so. And I went to the bookstore because you didn't Google then.
Right.
And I found a book on how to incorporate yourself in California.
Oh my gosh.
And I did that. And then that kind of led to, helping in the evenings after work. I'd
Right.
go write documentation. I'd test things. They'd
Right.
finish a release and they'd say, okay, do this, do that.
Wow. So I presume they were paying you?
No.
Really? Just learning as you go?
It just was, here's a problem. It needs to be solved. And it was just learning. I mean,
How
it was
fascinating.
like being in a classroom.
Right.
And I think what engaged me about it, Ryan, is my day job. I was working with all of the output of what their software
Right.
was going to help the company do, which is, in that time we were building pinball games. And so I was learning about what a bill of material was, what standard costing is, what purchasing is. And
Right.
it kind of brought together that commerce along with learning and thinking about how that's happening
Right.
in my own company.
And you were learning it on the job.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that I keep seeing in the industry. And part of the reason why we do the show is that it's fascinating how much you learn by just going out there and doing.
Yeah.
And, I didn't connect anything with my computer science degree to the first job I did. And I thought, this isn't
Mm-hmm.
right. And if I had just gone out and programmed instead,
Mm-hmm.
I would have been learning like you.
Mhm.
So you were learning a ton about, how to set up a business and how to run a business and still volunteering this whole time, or did they eventually pay you? Or
Well, eventually, I don't even know who suggested it. If I suggested it, they suggested it. But they said, you could we've got lots to do. You could do this full time and you could join us and be a co-founder.
oh wow.
And I said, sounds interesting. And they said, yeah, we have this thing called stock. And okay. So I dropped out of college. I quit my job
Okay.
and I started working for the company without pay.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And so what year was this?
Oh my gosh. I think I joined them when I was about 23. So it was probably, 9, 12 months. I haven't ever really thought about
That's amazing.
how long it took before the bug bit me, but the startup bug bit me.
Right.
And
Now you're a founder.
I'm a
with
founder.
stock.
Yeah.
No college degree.
Right.
Trying to figure it out. And
Yeah.
they were essentially building games, did you say?
No, ERP
ERP.
software.
Got it.
Enterprise Resource Planning software. So basically everything that's used to run a manufacturing
Right.
company. And our clients, we were self-funded. Our clients were all big names in the Valley at the time, National Semiconductor, Rome. I mean, lots of
Right.
companies who are no longer there.
Right.
But, and it was a great experience for 7 years.
So tell me though about the decision to drop out and do that, because that must not have been a quick or an easy or a simple one. So dive into your mind at that point and tell us how you made that decision.
I think I was probably torn, knowing how I process decisions today, because you're talking about a decision made 30 some years ago. But there's a part of me that wants to always have a plan and know the outcomes. And then there's another part of me that is pretty comfortable taking a lot of risks for myself. I won't do it for others, but I'll do
for
it
you.
for myself.
Interesting. Okay.
And so it was kind of that balancing act. College and that route had a path that looked really clear. Everybody follows it.
Right.
And believe me, I heard it from my grandma, my mom,
I bet.
friends. Why are you doing this? This isn't going to be successful. This isn't the way
Right.
to go. But then there was this other side of me that said, there's something to learn, there's something to do.
Mm,
And it it engaged me in a different way than the classroom and a standard path.
right.
Yeah.
So what was the strongest voice against that choice that you had to battle with emotionally?
Um, it was probably my mother's voice,
Mm,
both, you know, in the physical, her voice
right.
talking to me and her voice in my head,
Interesting.
you know.
How did you overcome that?
I kind of reflected on the fact that one of the interesting parts of my background is that I come from a family of 4 generations of women who have all had to strike out on their own and get into
Really?
business and take care of the family.
Oh, wow.
Going all the way back to my great-grandmother who had a barber shop in Seattle where Pike's Place Market is.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So
you could look back at your history and say,
Yeah.
hey, this has been done before.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, one of the goals of this show is to encourage people to be like you
mhm.
and say, if you don't have people in your life that are telling you that you can do these things, please look at my amazing guests who have done it, right? And you can do
You
it,
can do it.
right?
You can.
So that's amazing. So keep going because I think the story just gets more and more interesting. So you're at this company building ERP software,
yeah.
3 founders.
3 founders.
Have you started to grow at that
Yeah.
point?
Yeah, we never it ended in 7 years. So over that 7-year period, we grew the company and had, probably a dozen customers, big name customers that were working with our product. But we didn't end up getting funding. We waited too long to go out for
Oh,
funding.
interesting.
And we didn't get it. And then that became the constraint for us.
Got
So
it.
we couldn't, kind of compete with our competitors out there. We were naive.
Right.
We were in the Valley at a really competitive time in our space and thought that just having a really good product and a great idea would get us there.
Right.
So I learned so many lessons, though. I mean, I tell people all the time that 7 years trumps any college education
Right.
up to, and through a master's.
Right. Yeah. You can't replicate the emotion, the fear, the confusion.
And all the different things I got to do. I mean, I literally, at one point, we joke that my business card should say, she does everything but program. And I did. I mean, who would have said, to a 23-year-old, yeah, come in and set up the books when I didn't have that training.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the desire to learn is key here,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah. I think it's the desire to learn, to be willing to take some risks combined with not afraid of change.
Right.
Right. And that's that equation for me that just allowed me a ton of opportunities.
Right. Wow. So one thing I want to ask you is, what was one of the most significant challenges you had to overcome in your career, especially as a woman in technology?
It's gonna sound a little tired or overused because it's been used a lot recently, but being young, being a blonde, and having to go into situations where I was the authority on my product.
Right.
And so I was talking to people, training people, or selling to people who were easily, a decade or 2 decades older than me,
Right.
men.
Right.
Yeah. And so establishing credibility
Mm,
and learning how to do that.
right.
I mean, at first I kind of accepted it when I was, asked to literally go get coffee when we went to a meeting. And
Really?
somebody said to my partner, well, let's, go on with this demo. And, Holly, would you go get us both coffee?
Oh my gosh.
That's
unbelievable.
Yeah. And I did, because I didn't know to say no or to find a way to shift the situation.
So how if you were to go put yourself in that same position now, God forbid that would happen now, but I'm sure it does.
Unfortunately,
a lot.
It does.
How should women deal with that? What should they do that doesn't endanger their career at the same time?
Well, I think what I learned eventually in a fairly short period of time was how to kind of establish power when I walked into the room. So, my partners and I, we kind of huddled on it. They were very cool guys. And we said, okay, Holly's always going to lead the meeting.
Oh, cool.
Holly's going to introduce us, and she's going to run the meeting. And that immediately gave me credibility
fascinating.
And leveled the playing field in those conversations.
Right.
So I would say, thinking about that very consciously and intentionally and saying, how do I come into the room or into a situation, bringing my experience, my skills, and establish that power?
Right as you walk in the room.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So what are a couple movements or body dynamics you can do that do that just to get tactical?
Yeah. You always stand very, very straight.
Right.
My mom taught me from a very young age to walk across a room with a book on my head because she was a model for a short period of time. And so I think, I always remembered that. It's how you dress. So I always dressed 2 notches more than any of my clients.
Interesting.
And I also took up adopted black as kind of my color of choice. So those are the physical.
Yep.
And then it's just thinking about how you're talking, the expressions you use. Really early on, I dropped slang from my language.
Right.
At that point in time, I had to get very comfortable with swear words being used, and not flinch or be uncomfortable.
Right.
I don't think I ever had a situation where I had to tell somebody they crossed the line verbally.
Got it. Right.
But I probably was prepared.
Right.
So it's just really kind of thinking it through.
Right.
Before you move into the situation.
That's interesting. I've been teaching my kids a lot about how you portray either confidence or not confidence to someone very quickly.
Yeah.
And it's all about looking in the eye and standing up straight and
putting
your shoulders
hands
back. And yes.
Yeah. So for women, shaking hands, well, today it's not as big a deal, but it used to be, you always did do kind of limp hand.
Interesting. Really?
And
Okay.
And so it was my stepfather who taught me, said, no, you go into a situation and you're going to meet it this way. And we practiced until I just got it.
Right.
So just like you're doing with the kids.
So that's interesting, though. You had did you say a stepdad? So you had someone in your life to do that.
Yeah.
To teach you that.
Yeah.
And I'm realizing the importance of that and how a lot of people don't have any of that support.
Yeah.
And it makes it even harder to succeed. So again, it's fun to hear those tactical details because hopefully people that are watching or listening can learn from that.
I hope so.
And say, okay, I need to stand up straight,
Yeah.
right? You need to shake hands properly.
Yeah.
It's kind of the basics, but they really are important. I've realized something silly is, whenever I walk through a door, just put my shoulders back and try to smile. Because it's usually the first thing people see, right? If you're kind of slumped over or tired, they perceive you differently. So that's fascinating. So really establishing your credibility was the huge challenge. Hey, I'm a woman. I happen to have blonde hair, but I am absolutely credible here. And that's interesting how you figured out how to maneuver around that and actually make it your strength. So one thing I want to ask you is, what's a tactic for overcoming your own mind when it tells you that you can't do something?
Tactic for overcoming your own mind. So first off, my mind has a great it's very talkative.
Right.
You know, we have long conversations with each other. You know, really?
Right.
No. I think for me, it really is kind of, I'll spend a lot of time looking at a situation from all the angles.
Okay.
And so if I feel like, you know, I'm boxing myself in and saying I can't, I'll start with the question of why.
Why?
You know, why can't I?
Mm.
And I'll, you know, kind of poke at that. If that doesn't break me out of it, because if I hit that golden nugget for me, which is there's an opportunity to learn something or to change something, I usually can get myself over it. But if I still haven't, then what I'll do is I'll try and think through what's the absolute worst thing that would happen, right?
Interesting.
I call it the being 5 and there's a funny sound under your bed.
Right.
Right? So think about what's that sound, Holly? What is it you think it is? And just try and take myself as deep into where my fear is.
Oh, interesting.
Right. And then step back and say, okay, well, if that's the worst,
right.
Can you get over that?
Right.
And how likely is that to happen? So it's really kind of like, you know, dad walking in and saying, well, let's look under that bed together.
And
you know,
see what's really there.
Sometimes you just have to look under the bed by yourself.
Right.
And that generally will break me out of it. You know, I'll get to that place to say, oh, well, if the worst thing that's going to happen to me, if I take this leap and do this job is I decide it's not a good fit for me or I'm not successful, then I leave.
Right.
You know, or I move somewhere and I don't like the weather in Portland, Oregon.
Right.
Well, we'll move again.
Right.
Move
it's not the end of the world.
26 times before.
You can do it again.
Yeah.
Right.
You know?
So tell us then what happened next. So the ERP company ended up not making it.
Right.
But you learned a ton.
Oh.
And then tell me what happens next.
Yeah. So after we shut it down and it had many lessons, you know, so I don't want to over romanticize what that 7 years was like because there were some very tough lessons, but we survived them,
right.
You know, and we ended up shutting the company down and I had to go look for my first real job. And so here I was, 29, I think by that point. And I'd held all of these different positions and I have to write a resume.
Right.
And it's
like, how do
you do that?
Right.
I can say answer systems and all these different roles, but I don't want to use big titles because nobody will hire me for a big title. And what jobs do I show before that? And there's this big blank at the bottom of the resume.
Right.
And at that point in time, Ryan, I mean, it was huge if you didn't have college on your resume.
Right.
So I spent a lot of time writing that first professional resume and, you know, wasn't even certain that there were a ton of companies in exactly our space. I knew the ones in the Bay Area, but it was like none of those would probably hire me because I was missing that piece of paper.
Wow.
And so I'm combing ads because newspapers still existed.
Right.
Print newspapers still existed.
Right.
And ads were still the way you found jobs or headhunters.
Right.
And I found this ad that didn't quite sound like what I was doing, but I took a flyer on it. I said, well, it sounds kind of close. Sent them my resume. Lo and behold, got an interview, and they did exactly what we did. They were based out of New England.
Oh, really?
They needed a professional services engineer.
Huh.
And my job was going all over the United States installing the software in machine shops and metal fab shops. Oh, yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
And so I was with them for another 7 years. I started as a professional services engineer, ended up being vice president of customer service and support. Yep, worldwide.
So how and initially they just didn't require a college degree, or did you get around it somehow?
They said it was required, and I
that's
just
interesting.
said, I'm going to send in my resume, and walked into the interview practicing all of those things that I mentioned before, just coming in and trying to bring my power with me.
Right.
And my self-confidence, and engaged him in that conversation, thought back on all the times I was in a new classroom.
Right.
And connected.
Right.
Within minutes.
Wow. And did they ever mention the lack of a college degree?
Oh,
Did it ever come up?
Yeah.
Really?
And,
what happened?
I just pointed out that I had just spent 7 years in the best college in the United States. And I got a little bit cocky and said, and I defy you to find a curriculum that would match. So I
bet
think
they thought,
that,
okay.
Yeah, I think that actually was part of what got me the job.
Yeah. I mean, we would hire someone like that in a second.
Yeah.
Because okay, this person's proactive. They've learned. They've actually experienced real things.
And
they have life experience.
If they have a problem, they'll try and figure it out.
Yeah, clearly they figured that out. Wow. So you were traveling the nation, installing systems and software.
Yes.
And were you by yourself, or did you go with the team? Really?
Oh, yeah.
That must have been exciting.
Let's see. My portable computer was an IBM AT.
Okay.
Which meant it came in 3 boxes about yay big. My printer, which went with me, was a dot matrix printer, equally big. So I had a car with a very big trunk.
Holy cow. Did you drive across the nation or fly?
Sometimes I would fly, but a lot of times if I was going in to do an installation and training and implementation, because we'd try and do all of it in one fell swoop.
Okay.
So I'd be there for maybe a week to 10 days.
That's wild.
I would drive.
Okay.
But sometimes, I'd fly and have to check all those boxes and, have
your
my little trolley,
computers.
with me. And
that's wild.
Then walk into a machine shop that's, could be a screw machine shop. It could be, a turning shop, whatever. And again, you can imagine being 29 blonde. It wasn't easy, but I loved the job.
So you did that for 7 years.
Yep.
And then what?
Well, so they had made me vice president. When I got that promotion, they asked me to move to New England. My husband said, of course, we're moving to New England. And so never having lived anywhere but Northern California.
Right.
We moved across the country.
Got it.
We were there for 2 years. Again, great experiences, but I really realized that I am more comfortable on the West Coast.
Okay.
So one day I called him up and said, we're moving, because he was consulting at the time. And he said, where are we moving?
Okay.
He's a great guy. And I said, Portland, Oregon.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Why?
Every time I would come to see a client here and I'd fly into PDX, I felt like I was flying into my home airport.
Oh, interesting.
You know that feeling?
Yep.
Wherever you're living, when you were, over in the UK or here, there's just something about your home airport.
Right. That's fascinating.
I got that.
So you said 2 things that are interesting that you glossed over, which are big. They promoted me to VP.
Oh, yeah.
And I have a husband. So wait. Okay, so let's dig in.
Where did those happen?
Wait a minute. So I think, how did you go from, starting to being a VP? So let's dig into that a little bit, because especially without a degree, we want to help people understand how do you advance like that.
It was, I think, probably 3 things. 1, just good old-fashioned hard work. I did love my job, and I think when you love your job, you do a good job. Right. And so I wasn't afraid. If they said, well, Holly, we've got, an installation in American Falls, Idaho in February.
Right. Okay. Good times.
I didn't say, I don't want to go.
Right.
I
sure.
just said, sure.
Right.
Yeah. I volunteered, for to do things, take on special projects.
Yep.
And a piece of advice that actually I think it was a very dear family friend gave me early in my career was always do the job that you want to have.
Oh, interesting.
So strive for that. Show that you can do that. So for me, I started as a professional services engineer. So what was it I wanted to be? I wanted to manage people.
Okay.
By that point in my career, I knew I was more a people person.
Right.
So I just started doing it.
Right.
And so I got that promotion.
Interesting.
And then, I got the next promotion.
Right. So do the job that you want to get promoted to.
Yep.
I love it.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's very true. And I can attest to that. One of the people that has gone from the bottom to the top of Treehouse is a guy named Mike Watson. And he started as a salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's my chief operating officer. And it was because of that that kept happening. I was like, oh, you're doing this job now. You seem pretty good at that, so.
Why would I go and look outside? Why would I go look for somebody who had that title on their resume?
Yeah, I already know you. I trust you.
Yep.
You're hardworking. It's okay. So that's the VP. That's impressive.
Yeah.
Now, what about the husband? Where did he come from?
Well, the husband was one of those other co-founders of the first software company.
Interesting.
So, you can stay married a lot of years if you end up starting a company together and make it through. So, yes. So we got married a couple of years into the tenure of Answer Systems. And we've been together now. It'll be 38 years this year.
That's amazing. Congrats.
Thanks.
So let's dig it a little bit into the culture in America and college degrees.
Mm-hmm.
So it is still told to everybody, you need a college degree in order to succeed. You have to go. It's the path to success.
Mm-hmm.
Especially we're hearing this by folks that are lower income, that it's the way to get out of that. You are an obvious counterpoint. I mean, you didn't even finish your degree.
Right.
And we haven't even got to being chief operating officer yet in your life. I want to hear that story. So what is the difference? Like, why didn't you need a degree? And why don't other people need degrees to be successful?
I think what you need to determine is what is the path that allows you to learn that can put you on that path to personal success.
Okay.
So for me, as we've kind of touched on a number of times, I love learning, but I need to learn in real world settings.
Right.
So I found out when Answer Systems that I hated math in any shape, form, or way in school.
Right.
Until I got into Answer Systems, and Austin showed me how to take a 13-column pad and build a general ledger. And it was like, this is practical.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's real.
And exactly, it's
Right,
real. And
right.
so for me, that's a really important part. So I think for somebody who's trying to figure out how to take themselves to that next level or break out of where they are, it's not that it's a 4-year or a 2-year or a trade or an online. It's how do you learn? What gets that passion going?
Right.
Then use that path.
Right. Got it. And as you've shown, often the most effective path is doing the job.
Yeah.
And learning on the job and actually getting paid to do the job.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. I did some of the math behind the difference in your retirement account if you actually got a job straight after high school versus going into debt with a college degree. And it's shocking.
Yeah.
So
it's sad.
It is. Yeah. I want people to rethink the math there and understand,
It's really critical that we as individuals take responsibility for that, but we as a society do as well. And I think the things that society can do is remove that stigmatism, that the only way to do it is through a 4-year college and, rack up $60,000, $70,000 in debt.
Yeah, most people don't understand the average monthly student debt payment is over $300. And when you think about, gosh, I've got to make a payment of $300 and you can't save as much for your retirement.
Yep.
You can't save for your kids. You just can't do a lot.
Yeah.
So that's really helpful. So what do you think we need to do, though, to change that perception that the college degree is necessary? It's so ingrained.
So that is a really good question, Ryan. So one of the companies that I worked for was a company called Casey Distance Learning, which was online middle school.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
There you go.
And I went to work for them. I was their COO because I really did believe in the mission, which was provide different pathways to education,
Right.
To kids.
Right.
And I think, this was, probably 8 years ago, when I was with them. And at that point, charter schools and online charter schools were very much, new. The public school systems were, anti-choices. And so I got to see kind of from the inside some of the barriers to offering different paths.
Okay.
And I think probably the biggest one that we have to accept is that the public school system, as it has developed,
Right.
starting with, grade school, but going into middle school and beyond, is not sufficient to sustain us.
Right.
And the entry points have to be different.
Right. Right.
And that's going to require taking on very big unions, right?
Right. It's tough.
Deconstructing, well-held beliefs.
Right.
And that's just going to mean a lot of people working really hard to show that other choices can work.
Right. Right.
And just keeping at it.
Keeping at it. We're thinking about things like apprenticeship as an answer. And kind of encouraging folks to go back to a time where they imagine doing more trade jobs and apprenticeship. And something I realized is that all the work that we're kind of doing now is our sort of stackable trade skills. So like you went to that first job and you were learning how to measure things in the fabric store and do the math, and you're sort of stacking that trade skill, and then you learn how to do accounting, and then you learn how to do some
fire computers and
right, and you're just stacking skills the whole time.
Yep.
Right. So so why not just approach it more like that? So that's really helpful. So I'd love to continue to hear your story.
Yeah.
So you were a VP, and then you said, I want to move to the West Coast.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Well, so when we moved to the West Coast, so I resigned my job. Here's an example of one of those places where you have to say, I've got to make a decision. Do I stay the safe path, my VP job and the rest of it, or do I take a risk?
Right.
Because I'm not happy, whatever happy meant.
Right.
I don't know anything about Portland. Maybe should have investigated that a little bit more as to what did tech look like here.
Sure.
Because by this point, I'm pretty deeply in tech.
Right. Right.
But, made the jump. And made the jump being willing to step back in my career.
Oh,
so something, I do a lot of mentoring of, executive coaching of executives and mentoring of young adults. And one of the things that I'll tell both groups always is, don't be afraid to step back. You've been a VP, you're managing, many people, many dollars of budget. Step back into a role that you've done before, that you're good at.
Right.
Replay the course if you're a golfer, right?
Okay.
You know the places where you took too long to or too many shots.
Right.
You can play it differently.
Right. Isn't the fear though that you will somehow be perceived to have gone back and can't?
Yep.
How do you deal with that?
Or the people will think that I failed as an executive and I'm doing this. And I think for me, it's not dissimilar to having to overcome the I don't have a degree question.
Interesting. Right.
And so just coming forth and saying, you know what, I loved being a professional services engineer, which is what I chose to do. I love helping people, training, seeing the light bulb go off. That was my script. And it was the truth, and, not all of my interviews went well. I mean, sure, I had some people kind of discount me and say, okay, there's something else wrong.
Right.
But I had some people, more than one, say, okay, that makes sense. I can understand that. So I got a job as a PSE only took 2 months,
Okay.
at the bottom of one of Oregon's many recessions.
Oh, gosh. That must have been fun.
Yeah. And it wasn't a tech company here because we didn't have software at all in 1980.
Wow. Right.
So, but became a PSE for a company out of Minnesota.
Got it.
And I played the course through again. And in 4 years was back in an executive
Instead of
role.
7. So you cut it down.
Yeah, I cut it down.
Wow.
But I was commuting to Minnesota then.
Oof.
Every week.
Every week?
Every week.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Monday,
Okay.
Friday. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, I kind of stepped back and said, is this what I wanted to do?
Right.
And so made the decision I wanted to find a software company in Oregon
Okay.
that I could bring kind of my experiences, but stay in management. And
Right.
so I started looking for the right early stage company.
Okay.
So
Tell us about that.
therein ensued four rough years
Really?
because it was 4 companies in 4 years,
Oof.
each one getting acquired
Okay.
by a company out of state
Oh.
and me commuting.
Oh, God. 4 times over 4
times.
years.
Yeah. I started nicknaming myself Acquisition Annie because I figured it was something, it was my fault or
That's
maybe that I
crazy.
was the lucky charm for
Right.
the CEO.
Right.
But then I learned that, as you probably have being here, that is not an uncommon outcome
Right.
for, technology companies here, and particularly in that period of time.
Yeah.
So got through that and landed, my 5th company was this company, early stage, called WebTrends.
Aha.
Yeah.
There you go.
And so I joined them as their first executive leading professional services.
Really?
And built that from 0 to over $1 million in billable services in just under a year.
Wow.
So
I think it's profound that, at this point in your career, clearly no one cared if you had a college degree.
yeah, by that
Right.
time,
It's
pretty much the question had disappeared. I mean, now
Yeah.
the resume is 3 pages long.
right.
You
And
know?
I don't think we're thinking about this enough in general, that really it's the first step.
Yeah.
That's the one,
hardest.
supposedly.
Yeah.
And so you go to school for 4 years and you go $60,000 in debt for the first job.
Mhm.
And then after that, it just literally doesn't matter.
Mhm.
And then you get to this point, you are an executive leading a huge team, growing to $1 million in revenue. And yet you didn't even finish junior college.
Mhm.
So what were some of the hardest parts of either that job, that you were tackling then, or any jobs after that?
I think that the hardest part as your career goes, and I'm sure as CEO you've had this happen, you start playing kind of 3 moves out.
Right.
You have to, right? You're no longer in the moment and doing a good job with that client or that project. You have to think about those outcomes. Learning those skills, practicing them all the time, not getting kind of sucked into let's work for success in the very moment.
Right.
That was challenging. I was always walking into management teams at that point in my career with educations that Ivy League,
Wow.
PhDs,
Right.
And nobody held it against me. I probably, would question myself sometimes and say, would I be doing this differently
Right.
if I had that college education? And yet I just, over time, I kept pushing myself to say, kind of talk myself out of it.
Right.
And then keep pushing myself into that place of think 3 moves out.
Right.
3 moves out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That is hard to do. But again, you were trying to figure out what the monster was under the bed.
Yep.
And was it actually real? And I do think it's interesting how you're feeling that fear of, okay, I'm dealing with all these people that do have these expensive, fancy degrees. Maybe I'm not at the same level, but I don't know about you, but I feel like at every stage of your career, no matter really what education you have, you still feel inadequate somehow.
Yeah.
Do you think everyone feels that basically and doesn't talk about it?
Yes.
Okay.
So I joined a company here in town called Puppet Labs when I joined. And Luke Knies, who you know was the CEO, and I had never heard of Imposter Syndrome until I got to Puppet.
Right.
Okay.
You had felt it, but not heard the word.
Exactly. I didn't have a label for it.
Interesting.
And I got there, and you know, Luke, being who he is, kind of encouraged people to not be afraid to talk about it.
Okay.
Right?
Huh.
And it was like, oh my, this is kind of interesting. I'm not the only person who feels that.
Right.
You know? And you can feel it situationally.
Right.
So I think that it was like finding that the monster under the bed was just a creaky floor.
Right. And then everybody has the same creaky floor and monster.
Yeah.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, you know, some of the things that I was doing to get myself through it or to work through it worked for others who had, you know, these incredible, you know, at least in my eyes, these incredible educations.
Right.
Yeah.
So what are you most proud of in your career?
The number of leaders that I've helped develop.
Wow. Tell me about that.
So I love looking at all of the people I know and where they were in their career when they were working for me or when I was doing coaching with them or consulting to them, because I've had a couple of consulting companies, and seeing where they are now and knowing that I had an influence. Didn't make them who they are today. They made it.
Right.
But I helped them. As you said earlier, it really takes knowing that you have mentors, people who care, right? Sometimes the people who care find you, and sometimes you have to find the person who cares.
Right.
But yeah, and they're all leaders.
Oh, that must be so satisfying.
It is. It is.
So one story we talked about on the phone that we didn't go into detail, I thought would be fun to ask about, was you said specifically having to go and try to raise money, and which is hard, period.
Yes.
But as a woman in technology, it must be way harder. So just tell me about that.
Yeah. So the very first experience, and, you know, again, goes back to that very first startup company. And I had no idea that, you know, people actually went to firms and asked for money. So the whole concept of venture capitals, and I had to read about it.
Yeah,
and,
it doesn't really make sense. So I agree.
That was a good decision. And we were in Sunnyvale, you know, so right around the corner from Sand Hill Road. And Sand Hill Road was the only place you went in those days.
Right.
And New York didn't even do startups. And so we thought that's what we needed. We needed capital, and the only way to find it was to go talk to a venture capitalist.
Right.
And my partner, now my husband, had a contact. You know, we put together our plans. First off, okay, this is what we're going to do. And we said, well, who are we going to go talk to? And he had this contact who worked at Kleiner Perkins and was kind enough to get us an audience with one of the, not a partner, but one of the fund managers. And we went in and did our pitch. And I think we were, you know, probably looking for the grand total of $150,000, which we thought was, you know, the moon and back.
Right.
And we made our graphs, and, you know, they had to be not drawn by hand, but there was no PowerPoint.
Right.
And we took in our full presentation, and, you know, there was my first encounter with, there are places, or were places, that as a woman, you didn't talk.
Wow.
Really. And so, you know, Austin and Al, our partner, did the pitch, and it was frustrating because I knew I could do the pitch better.
Right.
But that's what it was. I think I mentioned on the phone, we walked out and gosh, we were all a little demoralized. The questions were hard.
Right.
I mean, it was just the VC pitch,
Yeah, it's brutal.
And about halfway into the meeting, this gentleman walked in, didn't introduce himself, just kind of sat down at the table and listened. And it's like, okay, is anybody going to tell me who he is?
Who is this person?
What? Yeah. And we found out later it was Eugene Kleiner.
Wow.
And,
how rude not to introduce himself. Come on, people. This is common courtesy.
Not in that day and age.
Gosh.
And so, that's my big claim to fame. I've pitched to Eugene Kleiner, or we pitched to Eugene Kleiner. But, as my career progressed, as part of executive teams, I had the opportunity to either be in initial pitch or diligence aspects of it. And as a woman, it is hard, and it kind of goes back to those fundamentals where you have to kind of take your power from the very moment, establish that relationship, make yourself real, believe in yourself, and you just kind of have to get up. And it's no easier for guys. I mean, raising money is just not fun.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone up and down Sand Hill Road and done, the show, and it's hard, but and this is where I feel like the scales fell off my eyes about a year ago when I started to really think about how much privilege I had just as a male, like in this environment. I don't have to fight people to get them to take me seriously and respect me, and it just doesn't seem fair, number one. And you've achieved what you've done beside, in spite of all that.
Yeah.
And it's awesome.
Well, thank you.
It really is impressive. I mean, and unless you've actually trooped up and down Sand Hill Road and done it, you can't understand just how terrifying that is, period, let alone if folks didn't give you the respect you deserved initially. So I'm truly impressed by that.
Yeah.
And I'm impressed by what you've achieved, role after role and growing after growing and coaching people and launching companies. And it's very impressive. So I just want to thank you for your time.
My pleasure. I've totally enjoyed our conversation.
It's been really fun. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
People are watching and they want to find you or learn more about you, where should they go?
Probably the easiest way is just email me at holly@hollyfiles.com.
There you go. I knew that when you had your own domain, you were serious. Yeah. So, all right. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right, bye.
Bye.